pledges like we normally do. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. That gets the blood flowing. Everybody can stand up after the committee meetings. Madam Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Director Anderson.
Here.
Director Buchanan. Here. Director Colson. Here. Director DeWitt.
Here.
Director Durante. Here. Director Frega. Here. Director Fuentes.
Here.
Director Hobson. Director Lewis.
Here.
Director McGallis. Here. Director Melvin.
Here.
Director Payne.
Here.
Director Ross.
Here.
Director Totten. Director Troiani.
Here.
Chairman Dillard.
Here.
We have a quorum of 15 present with 1 absent.
Thank you, and once again to the board, I thank you very much for your great attendance, and it's always impressive that people attend all of the committee hearings as well, even when they're not members of a committee. I appreciate that very much. Before we begin, we've been on a pattern of losing great champions for mass transit in our area. We lost Judy Bartopinka. We lost Joe Texan, who actually designed and wrote the RTA Act. Governor Dan Walker passed recently, who signed the RTA authorization. But just in the last couple of days, and it's a gentleman that I actually knew and had the privilege of working with, Clark Burris, who was the first African-American comptroller of the city of Chicago, and former CTA board chair, Sarah Pang, and others from the city. But in reading Mr. Burris's obituary, one thing that caught my eye here was the comments of one of my predecessors, Gail Franzen, former chairman of the RTA, who gave us a great history lesson. He said that Mr. Burris worked with the RTA to establish the initial formulas that divided transportation funding. This will sound familiar, folks. That divided the transportation funding, with the CTA getting 50%, Metro 45%, and PACE 5%. And Gail went on to say, and this is the Clark Burris that I knew, Mr. Burris was instrumental in creating a $1 billion capital improvement fund for mass transit that allowed Metro to buy new rail cars and the CTA to rebuild the Green Line during his days. So I want the record to reflect that the RTA thanks Mr. Burris for his great service, his leadership, an incredible career. And one of the things that I noticed here is that Carol Brown, the mayor's new chief financial officer, said he mentored probably more young African-American people into the financial service industries in the 80s and 90s than anyone in Chicago history. So Clark Burris, great man, very distinguished gentleman. If you ever got to meet him, and a champion of mass transit, and I want the record to reflect our thanks and the loss of another truly great Chicagoan. So. And he was on our board. That's correct, Audrey. Thank you for bringing that out. He was, like so many, he served on both the CTA as its chairman, but was on this board as well. So somebody who clearly was a proponent of mass transit. With that, let's go to item 3A, the approval of the minutes from meetings held on May 21, 2015. Is there any discussion of the minutes that are in our packet? Seeing none, can I have a motion and a second? It's been moved by Director Fuentes, seconded by Director Melvin, that we approve the minutes from May 21st, 2015. With that, we'll establish, I guess, a baseline roll call here. Audrey, can you call the roll, please?
Sure. Director Anderson.
Yes.
Director Buchanan.
Yes.
Director Colson.
Yes.
Director DeWitt.
Yes.
Director Durante.
Yes.
Director Frega.
Yes.
Director Fuentes.
Yes.
Director Lewis.
Yes.
Director McGallis.
Yes.
Director Melvin.
Yes.
Director Pang.
Yes.
Director Ross.
Yes.
Director Totten.
Yes.
Director Troiani.
Yes.
Chairman Dillard.
Yes.
15 ayes and 1 absent.
Great. 15 to nothing. The minutes are approved. Item 3B, Nadine, you want to report on the docket review system that we have in place here?
Yes, in accordance with Section 2.06 of the Open Meetings Act, public bodies are required to review closed meeting minutes periodically to determine whether a need for confidentiality continues to exist with respect to all or part of those minutes. The board met in executive session on May 21st, 2015 to review past closed meeting minutes, I believe from the 90s this time. The board determined that based on their review, several executive session discussions can now be released. The remaining confidential minutes of closed meetings will continue to stay close to inspection by the public because the need for confidentiality still exists as to those minutes. The board will continue to review these minutes to determine whether any changes in circumstances indicate that they may be made available in the future for review. Mr. Chairman, this determination is made with the consensus agreement of the board.
Great, thank you. Any questions of Nadine? A boring and laborious process, but legally required and important nonetheless. So, okay. Next is the normal public comment section of the meeting. There are no speakers scheduled for today, so we will move on to Director Redden's report. Leanne?
Good morning, everybody. I will begin with where we always begin our report with the state delinquency. And as of today, $271.5 million is owed to us by the state of Illinois. But I think probably a more interesting and perhaps more relevant conversation for us today is I wanted to spend a couple of minutes giving you an update on the state budget. As many of you know, we give you regular updates when the legislature is in regular session, but as you know, they are in overtime session, meeting typically once a week. There's a lot of media coverage, so most of you are probably keeping up, but I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just going through a little bit more in the weeds of some stuff just so people are aware of how some of this impacts the RTA and the transit system. So the General Assembly did pass a budget by the end of May. The funding for transit for fiscal year 2016 budget was held level to the levels of 2015's budget. But the bill has not yet been sent to the governor. The budget that was passed by the General Assembly is essentially anywhere between 3 and 4 billion, I should say, short in revenues to support that. So that conversation still continues. Consequently, in order to avoid reductions, there needs to be a new revenue agreement passed by the General Assembly. So as the media is reporting, there's a lot of discussion. Negotiations regarding the budget and other legislative items continue through this summer. If there is no budget agreement before the end of the fiscal year, which for the state is July 30th, which actually is a very likely scenario, transit in the region, though, will still be able to operate at least for the foreseeable future for a period of time. We're determining sort of if we do fall off a cliff when that might be. But there are some reasons why the buses and trains, we want to sort of assure the public, too, that the buses and trains will continue to run. Sales tax proceeds, which most of you, I think, are aware that most of our operating funding comes from a variety of sources. About 40% comes from sales tax, about 40% comes from fares, and about 20% is direct state revenues or grants. So the sales tax money will continue to be collected across our region and will continue to be forwarded to us. Another reason why, and that's dictated by state statute, and that's why, as B said, even though it's delayed, it's never late, and we will continue to get those monies. These payments are dictated by state statute and do come to us on a monthly basis. And they're not reliant on appropriation authorization. The state's PTF match on sales tax is already, as you know, several months behind by my previous slide. So in the first few months of fiscal year 2016, we'll still be receiving the monies due us from fiscal year 2015. So in other words, those monies will still flow to us for a couple of months. If the state catches up to FY16 PTF payments and there is still no budget deal, the RTA will still continue to receive PTF funds from the state. Those transfers are also dictated by state statute and do not rely on a state appropriation for authorization. So absent of actual legislation being passed by the General Assembly regarding the PTF formula, the only money that could be impacted by a budget deal failing to be reached are grants from IDOT. So traditionally, grants agreements are executed at the end of each fiscal year. Several weeks ago, the Governor did announce numerous FY15 grants will be suspended. The list includes FY grants for FY15 grants for of about $17.5 million for reimbursement for free and reduced fare. Be essentially reported, talked a little bit to that in her financial reports. We've also been notified that 2 grants in the ADA paratransit, totaling about $8.3 million, has also been suspended. These funds are used, as I just said, to reimburse for the free rides and the reduced fare programs, as well as the ADA services for people with disabilities across our region. At this time, it's not clear if we will actually receive those monies once a 2016 budget deal is reached, so we have to stay tuned for that. IDOT also recently informed us, so the good news, I say that in jest, continues, that they recently informed us that they don't have enough money to fulfill the capital projects that have actual existing grant agreements. So as Bea alluded to in the PMO program, these are projects that actually have a standing grant agreement with obligations by the state to support these capital projects. There is just not enough money to go around. IDOT, we actually pulled together a working session with the service boards and the Secretary of Transportation just last week to really work through what's on that list, what amount of monies are available, what payments are pending, and then the next tough question for us is what if we are faced with shutting projects down, what is the prioritization of shutting those projects down? So we'll continue to do that. We've been told that IDOT has about $200 million in cash available to fund our existing capital programs, and they will not be issuing any new debt until they identify a new source of funding, a dedicated source of revenue for future bond issuance. So the IDOT, though, has entered into grant agreements with the service boards for over $800 million in capital funds. So right there you see the challenge that we're facing. So be prepared for, I think, some of the practical outcome is any future PMO report would show perhaps some significant delays. I think also you'll start seeing, typically we just do these capital program amendments that we just did in the Finance Committee once a quarter, moving things around. I think you might start seeing those once a month because our goal would be to continue to fund and find ways to keep moving these existing construction projects forward as much as we can. So there's going to be a lot of moving around and deobligating maybe from one area, moving it over to another project to actually keep something going. There's also a cost to shutting down projects. It's not just sort of stalling it. If it's actually an active construction project, you've got to fence the hole and provide security and to provide ultimately safety in and around the region. So that's all part of the discussion and the calculus that the service boards are very diligently working on as we speak. The RTA was able to pass, though, a bit of good news out of the General Assembly this session, our ability to extend our short-term borrowing, which perhaps becomes even more important because, as you know, the short-term borrowing is not something we necessarily like to do, but it's monies that we use essentially to float, or as Bea likes to say, provide a cushion for the service board so we can continue to make payments to them so they can keep their services running while we're awaiting state payments. So those that ability to float that debt, which also does cost us more money, is going to perhaps be even more important for us. But that bill, though, is still waiting the governor's signature, but we haven't really heard much controversy around that. We will continue to send probably every couple of weeks. There's not a lot happening specifically in the transit space, but we will start resending you updates on what's happening as some of these conversations and issues sort of develop over the next few weeks, few months, and we'll see how all that goes. So right now, the conversations continue. Not a lot of good news, but we continue to work with the governor's office, the legislature, and others as we work through these discussions and these issues. Switching to Washington, with perhaps equally unimpressive news, the Congress did pass a 2-month extension of MAP 21, which really just bought ourselves some time, an extension of the Highway Trust Fund, but they didn't need to find new monies for that. They've essentially kicked the can on long-term funding. we assume that there'll probably be another short-term extension, not a long-term extension that we had been hoping for, but we'll see how that plays out. Even a 4-year bill at current funding levels would require Congress to find $60 billion. The challenge that we're all facing, and this is well reported in the media, is nobody really wants to talk about how we're actually going to fund any long-term support for infrastructure investment in this country. And the obvious sources are gas tax increase. There's a lot of conversation around sort of repatriation, tax reform, other creative financing mechanisms, but nothing that really solves the problem, so the conversations continue. We continue to work, though, with the Getting America to Work Coalition and try to sort of keep the drumbeat going on the need to invest in infrastructure. Secretary Fox released a blog post in May that talked about the negative impact of, not having long-term stable funding for our nation's infrastructure and the impact of not passing this long-term transportation bill. Just to give you a sense of how much we've kicked the can, we've had 20 short-term extensions of MAP 21 in over the last 6 years. So that's not a way to plan for the future and invest in the future. 6 states across the country have already delayed major projects. We in the coalition are launching a new campaign to really try to ratchet up the conversation around finding compelling stories about the impact of this sort of kicking the can, lack of long-term funding, and what it really costs us as sort of the opportunity cost of lack of investment. We'll also be sending letters to our congressional delegation. We are working with the Public Transportation Caucus, chaired by Congressman Lipinski and co-chaired by Congressman Comstock, to talk about a event in Washington to try to have a conversation at the congressional level about that lack of funding and the economic impacts to the region. Ways and Means has recently had some hearings, so at least there are some conversations beginning, but again, there's no real effort to talk about the big elephant in the room about funding. So changing topics, Mobility Services Department is in the process of creating a 6-part educational video series that will inform customers around the region about, focus on people with disabilities and older adults on how to better access the fixed route transit system. Better access on how to use PACE buses, CTA buses, and trains, as well as Metra. They're being released to time with the 25th anniversary of the ADA. The current video that's available is already posted on our website, and we will continue to push those out across the region. And as the full series has come together, we'll do a widespread effort to get that out far and wide across the region to really educate people on the benefits and how to actually use the transit system. One final note, June 18th was National Dump the Pump Day. Wonderful for us, it coincided with the Blackhawks Rally Day, so it was the perfect opportunity to encourage everybody to ride public transportation, and they came out in full force. We had, for the most part, with a couple of glitches along the way. For the most part, the transit system did a really good job at getting everybody in and out and around the downtown. I don't know if anyone was downtown those days. It was kind of heavy loads, but a kind of a fun environment if you just kind of went with the flow and enjoyed everybody in red and sort of cheering and enjoying themselves at very early hours in the morning. We have the chairman with his daughter who took, I think, a 6 a.m. train to make sure they got space at the rally. But it was
the only way you can get teenagers out of bed is to go to a Blackhawks rally. I had a bunch of teenage girls with me on the first express train in the morning. It's a great experience.
And we partnered with APTA. It's a national event. We got a lot of publicity and a lot of good coverage over it. We encourage riders to go on our Facebook page and sort of post photos of themselves riding transit and saying that they pledged to dump the pump. We use some of our ride-on marketing campaign tools to also augment that. So it was a great day. One small note, we also used, RTA ICE funds were also able to be allocated to provide some additional service that Metro ran specifically on that morning to accommodate some of those extra loads. and we got some very good coverage both in the media and in social media spaces, and good radio coverage. One final comment, since somebody did bring up a question about some of the marketing campaigns, I am pleased to announce that we have actually received, our Ride On campaign has received what they call a Silver Telly Award. I feel like I'm back in Australia calling it the Telly. But we received an award for a couple of our our TV commercials that we have run in the public service category. We received this award selected from nearly 12,000 entries from 50 states and numerous countries. So I think it's good recognition that our campaign is hitting the mark, has a good message, and it's nice to be recognized for some of that work that the staff have done. We'll continue to push out those ads as we talk about. It's a multi-year campaign. This is just the very start of that, but it's nice to be recognized. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, Director Lewis.
Leanne, you mentioned that there's, in order to make some of the funding projects complete, we have to repurpose or have to reprioritize some of the funds. Does that require any kind of approval, or is that a unilateral capability?
Yeah, just like the capital approval amendment we just did in the Finance Committee, we would be bringing those back to you. We normally only do it on a quarterly basis. Okay. We try to sort of compile a few. We don't have lots, and sometimes some of it's sort of just housekeeping, moving stuff. But because of having to be sort of flexible and responsive, we may be bringing these to you every month now, depending on how this plays out over the next few months.
All right, thanks.
Any other yes, Director Totten.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is there a way to compare, let me step back a minute. We know how much it costs in revenue to drive the toll roads. It's so much per mile with tolls. Is there a way to compare that to how much to travel CTA or Metro?
Yeah. We have like cost per mile and all that data in our performance metrics that we report. It's all available on our website. We could pull out, I don't have some of those numbers all committed to memory, but we could pull those. We can even give them to you today.
To compare it to the toll roads?
Well,
we have cost per mile, cost per efficiency. So, yes, those comparisons have been done. We'd have to pull them. So, in other words, I mean, you'd have to look at cost of riding a car, obviously your cost for tolls and fuel and upkeep and maintenance. That's what you're referring to versus the cost for transit.
Yeah,
that's all been done.
Yeah, I would like to see if it costs more for me to drive
It does.
than to take mass transit. What's the comparison?
Yeah. And it depends on what the trip is. I mean, if you're driving downtown, it's the cost for you to own the car, the amortized insurance costs, wear and tear, parking. There's a big one right there compared to the transit fare. So we've got estimates on that. You know, it varies greatly. And the tollway cost, remember, that's just the cost of the toll per mile. That doesn't factor in your personal cost.
Yeah, strip out the gas and just the cost of the tolls versus the fares on the mass transit. As an aside, when we look for revenue sources, you know, I'm still have championed, as Director McGallis can remember, I can't understand why on Interstate 80 it's a toll road in Ohio and it's a toll road in Indiana, but it's a free road in Illinois. There's a tremendous source of revenue there to change I-80 to a toll road. I mean, you take every employee off the state payroll and you put them on the toll road authority, and it doesn't cost that much to do it. But it's an interesting source of revenue that people seem afraid to tackle. But in these kind of financial straits, that a revenue source that's out there, and we seem to be avoiding it when everybody else is collecting. So that's why that comparison I'd like to see on the toll roads versus the mass transit on fares. Thank you.
I love to see those comparisons too, and I know that Susan Massal has a number of studies that show, one that we cite a lot is if you're a two-car family and you do get rid of one car so that someone can take mass transit, the savings are about $9,000 a year. And another interesting tidbit, because when we went looking at PACE's results, The gas prices, and yes, more people sometimes ditch the bus and drive because of lower gas prices, but gas prices are a smaller percentage of your cost of driving an automobile than you may think when you factor in insurance and your regular maintenance as well as the cost of the automobile. That gas prices really are only maybe a quarter of what it costs to operate your automobile. And I thought that was an interesting statistic. Director Totten, I still want to call you Senator Totten. You're always Senator to me. Director Totten, Leanne and I had breakfast with Peter DeFazio, Congressman DeFazio from Oregon, the Democrat head of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, just a couple of days ago in Chicago. And he said, in his estimation, the Congress will never go back to allowing tolling for currently existing public infrastructure projects. But that being said, if the Ileana is not going to go forward, I think some of the backup plan is to make some tremendous improvements to I-80 to handle primarily truck traffic. And if that discussion goes that way, that's something that I'm sure Secretary Blankenhorn at IDOT and others will start looking at, including perhaps having dedicated truck lanes on I-80. There are a number of engineering things that they want to do. So your idea, if there are great changes coming on I-80, which there may be if the Ileana doesn't go forward, at least ought to be in the mix out there. And on equal time, Leanne and I have a breakfast, I know, coming up in a month with Congressman Schuster, the chairman of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. So thank you. Good, excellent comments, Don, as always. Anything else? Anybody else have a question of Leanne? I want to give a special shout out to Jeremy LaMarche, and we're going to get into who represents us in Springfield under item 7. But poor Jeremy has been down there in that wonderfully happy place of Springfield and has done yeoman's work, including getting our authorization bill through and just trying to dig through the morass of rumors, as well as trying to dig in with Bea and Donna and her staff what these budget numbers mean to us. Jeremy's done a magnificent job. So, Leanne, if you're finished, we'll go on to item 6, which are the consent items as they appear on the board agenda. Anybody want these separated out at all? If not, let's do 6A, B, and C together. A is the combining financial report and certifying compliance with the RTA Act recovery ratios for 2014. 6B is the RTA 2014 comprehensive annual financial report. C is the ordinance approving the reprogramming of funding for ICE. And D is the 2015 capital program amendment for the second quarter. If there are any questions, seeing none, I need a motion and a second to approve those. Director Durante moves that we approve 6A through D, seconded by Director Totten. Is there leave for the attendance roll call? Seeing no objection, leave is granted, and that will be so reported.
15 ayes and 1 absent.
Yes, ma'am. Item 7 is the approval of contract and procurement item as it appears on our board agenda, and this is the ordinance authorizing contracts for state legislative and local consulting services. Jeremy, you want to say anything other than it's basically re-upping these people in the midst of chaos?
That's right. This is the same amount as last year, same consultants involved. The contract runs from August 1st, 2015 through July 31st, 2016.
I wish I had a crystal ball and could say what was going on down there. I will tell you, we have as good of intelligence through Jeremy and the folks that work under him as we're ever going to get, but it is impossible to predict what's going to transpire. And, our group is professional, well-respected, and covers every crevice that you can cover in the Capitol. And they're good folks, and they're very, very attentive to Jeremy whenever, or Leanne, whenever it's needed. Any questions on that? If not, can we have a motion? Yes, Director Todd, is that a
Thank you,
motion
Mr.
or a
Chairman.
question?
You said that the sum is the same, which I understand is right. Haven't we added one consultant to the group? Who got cut?
We did. We did add one consultant in March of last year, Nancy Kimmy. We added her for $35,000 last year. That amount remains the same in this upcoming year.
So Kimmy was added last year.
She was, yeah.
Yeah, we did it in March as a
Yep.
special board agenda item.
Okay.
She is, she is someone that came. She was the chairman of Judy Bartopinka's, or her chief of staff, and Nancy was integral in the Rauner transition, and has been invaluable in her information as to what's going on in the new administration and with IDOT. So. And along the lines of keeping gender balance, it's nice to have a woman work on our lobbying team in Springfield as well, as Sarah Pang says, "Amen, Mr. Chairman." So, Doug Trione, Director Trione, moves that we approve item 7, seconded by Director DeWitt. On that, is there? Yes, you have a question? Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chairman.
Sorry.
Just for clarification, she was brought on, Ms. Kimmy was brought on this past March. That was a short-term contract, as I recall. Is this approval for,
Yeah,
We're making them all concurrent, but that 35 is for a full year going.
for the rest of 2015?
correct. Yeah, her first contract was for 4 months. This is going to be for the
The
entire
rest
year.
of 2015?
No, for the
End of June next year.
correct. So
Okay,
they'll all line up.
One full year, very good.
Yep.
And one other comment, I recall during the approval of that particular contract, because of her particular level of expertise, there was some discussion at the time about periodic reporting that would be made back to the RTA. There was some discussion about that information flowing through to the board. I've not seen any of that.
We've asked each of the consultants to provide a comprehensive report for the end of the year. We'll pass that along as soon as we receive that from each of them.
And what we should do too, that's a good point, Tom. Jeremy, at one of these meetings, we probably ought to have the team come and literally, just kind of meet the board. Some of them have been to meetings. I've seen them from time to time. I bet you most of them, depending upon when the meeting is, many of them probably watch this now that we're online. Some of these people are really, really technologically savvy, but they're all very conscientious. I know all of them. They were here before I got here, with the exception of Ms. Kimmy, but most of them, I think, kind of watch our meetings, or at least this part, at least Leanne's report. So I'll get them here, Don. Thank you. Okay, with that, I'm sorry, somebody made a motion? Yeah, Director Trione made a motion, seconded by Director DeWitt. Is there leave for the attendance roll call? Seeing no objection, leave is granted. And Jeremy, thank you again for everything you're doing, and enjoy that summer in Springfield. Leanne and I will be down to see you periodically. Item 8, are there any new business to come before the board? If not, I want to remind everybody that Thursday, July 16th, regular routine committees at 8:30, board meeting right after is our next meeting. And item 9 is Nadine to explain why we are going to go into executive session. I don't believe we're going to do any substantive business that requires the board to come back out into public session. So when you're finished, Nadine, I'm going to have a motion that we adjourn. Thank you.
In accordance with Sections 2C29 and 2C5 of the Open Meetings Act, if the board will vote to adjourn from executive session, we can proceed to the closed portion of the meeting.
Great, thank you. With that, Director Durante moves that we adjourn, seconded by Director Pang. Seeing no objection, leave is granted, and we are adjourned going into executive session. Thank you all.